So for anyone else who's thinking, oh, this is only temporary, it's not, it's forever. And it's forever in some way or another, because even if we had a magic vaccine today, there's going to be emotional scarring from corona and habit changing that's never going to go back to where it was. So I guess what I'm saying is accept that it's happened and now face your demons and start fighting them one by one.
As we speak today to Salvatore Malatesta on Dirty Linen, the Premier's press conference is still going. I think that's about 2 hours. It might be a record, but it has been a very big announcement. Victoria today has heard our roadmap out of COVID into COVID normal, and it's a bit gutting. It's a long road, it's a slow road, it's a steady road. Salvatore, what do you reckon about today's announcement?
Oh, look, no surprises, Danny, I guess. I mean, it's in keeping with what I suspected might be the case. And it's going to be a more difficult one to contain, I think, as the sun keeps shining and people keep being enclosed in spaces.
Yeah, that's true. It's certainly, the outdoors certainly does call as spring kicks in more and more. But I guess, yeah, as it has been throughout this, Victorians are being asked to, do the right thing, get the case numbers down, and then hopefully, if we can get it right, then then once we're out for good. That's the idea.
I hope you're right.
Well, I hope I'm right too, and it's not my idea. I'm just, I guess, summarising what the Premier and the Chief Health Officer has said, and I don't know. It's just such a hard one for the community, and as we know, it's it's hard for lots of different industries, but it is, of course, as we speak to hospitality people here and lovers, it's incredibly difficult for the hospitality industry to cope with. Certainly a lot of anguish, angst and disappointment in the community this afternoon.
Oh, indeed. I mean, I think Victoria was pretty happy with itself early on, and then, of course, we know what's happened, and now we've been dealing with it, and I feel like we're the naughty state in a sense, or the unlucky state. And I think of Melbourne, and perhaps this is, me being a bit parochial, but I think of Melbourne as the heart and soul of, the Epicurean centre of Australia. So I feel like there's a deeper sense of sadness, if that's possible, amongst food and beverage people in Melbourne.
Yeah, I think you're right. And Sal, I didn't introduce you properly, but you are a hospitality innovator in Melbourne. So anybody that's enjoyed Melbourne cafes over the past, 15 years has been the beneficiary of the way that you brought coffee culture to our city through many different venues. Particularly, I think of Sonali in the back streets of South Melbourne, such an iconic destination for Melbourne coffee lovers of great cafe food. And of course, you're a wholesaler as well. So do you want to just maybe give us a little summary of your business, and then we'll talk about what you've been doing through the pandemic?
Yeah, of course. So I mean, it's a question I would have answered very differently, 6 months ago, because it was pretty simple to understand then. Where our heart and soul, our DNA, I mean, the sort of the raison d'être, is that we're a coffee sourcer, roaster, and supplier. That's what we do. We're a national wholesale coffee business, and the language of yesteryear was specialty coffee or third wave coffee, or single origin, single estate, micro lot focused coffee purveyors, any one of those words, but essentially, bringing coffee with a scoring of 85 or more plus to the market. That was a pioneering work we did in the early days, and that's still in our DNA. And at that point, we were very much a micro roastery, in that we had an in-shop roaster, and we had some wholesale customers, and a venue that last time we had not a pandemic, but a kind of market correction, the GFC, Sonali was actually the benefactor of, because we lifted the bar from cafe food to restaurant quality, and so people sparing some change went down instead of up, and that was great. So in a sense, I think that I can't remember. I think it was a Good Food Guide award for best food for or a couple one of those things years ago. We're all so there's two parts to the business. There's a wholesale business and there's a cafe. We like to say a restaurant serving breakfast rather than a cafe. And the third part, which is was always there but was not inconsequential, but it was more kind of something we were sort of having a stab at, was our online platform, which is a B2C offering, focusing on products, or up until Corona, focusing on products that we make and develop, and that can extend from obviously our coffee wholesaling, coffee beans, to our apparel range or tea selections or whatever.
Mm. Well, I think we can talk about how things have changed over the past 6 months, but I think I was first aware of some of the new stuff you were doing through Corona, when you came up with screens very early in the piece, and suddenly there was sanitizer. In fact, I bought some of your sanitizer when no one could get any, and dropped some over to my parents. And then you're doing masks, and I guess I mean, yeah, there just seemed to be so many ideas and so much innovation. So can you talk about what the kind of thinking that you did in March and how you came up with all these different ideas and innovations?
Yeah, of course, Jenny. I mean, like the truth is, I want to qualify this with, I completely understand there are a lot of people in a lot of pain and who have been kicked pretty hard by the corona. So I tell my story with the qualification that through a number of different moons aligning and enormous amount of good luck, we got a couple of things right. And one of those things was, so I always say, I turned 48 in a couple of weeks, and I was sort of not the end of my career, but the sort of relaxing part of my career, and handing over the ship to some of the other younger guys to run. So for the last sort of year, I've been investing a lot in our executive team, and I've got three individuals who have all been groomed for CEOship or whatever. And around about January, my best friend, who his name is Nick Duncan, who owns a sort of a industrial chemist business called Hydrochem, and they look after cooling towers, and they look after. He's Australia's Legionnaires expert, so he rang me. He rang me, I think, about January 3rd or something, and I think that was about a week after there was some noise from Wuhan. I mean, until that point, no one even sort of really knew what Wuhan was, or where it was, or what it was. But then he said to me, one of his clients had ordered a large amount of sanitizer from him, and I said to him, well, great. Why are you telling me? And he said, well, look, I'm an industrial chemist. I'm not really a brand guy or B2C guy. Why don't we go halves and we work something out? And I said, sure, I'm happy to give it a go. It's interesting. In fact, it probably underpins this idea that I've had of moving into cosmetics. So yeah, let's get it going. And so we fulfilled that order, Danny, and it was to you could probably work it out, but it was to Melbourne's gaming complex or entertainment complex. And I sort of sat back and I thought to myself, what what's going on there? So maybe there's a direct line there from from powers to be. Maybe they know something we don't know. So I rang Nick and I said, those leftover bottles, I'm going to put them online and see what happens. And he said, well, you're a coffee business. I'm like, yeah, we're a coffee business, but we're a sort of trusted brand. So I'm just gonna see what happens. So I put them online, and I drove from his factory to Brayside to where I live in South Yarra, and in the 26-minute drive, all 1,500 units sold out.
What?
So so I rang him and I said, I think we're onto something here. So we doubled down really quickly, and we managed to get a couple of the moons aligned pretty fast. And the most important one at the time was ethanol, getting supply. And then the second one was the input. So, we essentially just locked away a local bottle manufacturer and signed him up for, on that day. And same with labels and so forth. And then when Corona hit Australia pretty hard, I had a crew of 72 guys who were involved in sourcing, roasting, shipping, driving, making coffee that I could just move across to sanitizer production. So we did that, and we also had our Facebook ads pre-approved before Facebook banned PPE ads. So as you say, there was a period in time which I say was riding the world's largest, hand sanitizer wave that lasts probably about 3 weeks or just slightly over, where I was working 90 hours a week and I couldn't quite work out how to make things faster or move things faster. It was a crazy, crazy time.
It's so crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy. But Danny, what I learnt from that process was that maybe we could sell other things. And so, and ironically, we'd only upgraded the Shopify Plus 6 months ago. So I didn't even know what Shopify was, let alone Shopify Plus, which is obviously the commercial version of Shopify. And had we not done that, our website would have crashed.
Yeah, as you say, moons and stars aligning in that regard. So did you quickly think, oh, what else can I put on this platform?
Yeah, so I mean, so then, I'm the whole stage is a bit of a blur. But whenever we were told we could no longer serve customers in the restaurant space, so whatever stage that one's first round time, we essentially makeshift made a takeaway section at Sinale and turned that into a general store. So, very basic at this point. You walk in to get a cup of coffee, takeaway, and you're buying some eggs and bread and bacon and bits and pieces. But as I kept studying the sort of consumer patterns and people were, and our customers in particular who seem to have a natural aversion to large supermarkets, whatever we sort of put out, they bought. You know, whether it was toilet paper or butter or whatever. And I sort of thought about it because I always tend to build things that I would go to, and I don't actually ever go to a supermarket. Um, and if I do, it's online, and it's very rarely. But I always tend to go to smaller independents, just how my brain works, or I go to Prahran or South Melbourne markets or whatever. So I said, well, if I was getting a takeaway coffee in the morning and someone made it really easy for me, I would also buy the things that were in the queue to the coffee machine. So we kept adding things and adding things. So as we're adding things and realizing that people are buying the things that we're adding, then we got, again, fortuitous like the company that makes the hemp and copper masks. And I say this is what I mean about friendship equity, just years of doing business and people liking you. So a friend of mine, Simon Digby, he's a DJ. He's my age, but he was a sort of house DJ back in the 80s. He said to me he was making these masks locally, and whether if I wanted to do it with him, and I said, sure, but just so you know, if they take off, that we'll sell lots of them. So we need another option. At the same time, another friend of mine, who's the CEO of a company called Ecofiber, they make hemp and copper masks, which are their main business is CBD, THC, full spectrum oil, and with the sort of bits and pieces they make hemp protein and this 3D knitting. So we got the masks involved, and of course they went crazy. And so I thought, you know what, we're now, without realizing it, we're a tech business, we're an online business, we're like the D and DeLuca, or aspirationally D and DeLuca back of sort of, and we can give it a go. So then we started adding silly things, like a 98 Dom and 21-year-old whiskey from Japan and that kind of thing, and they started selling. And so I thought, well, instead of this being the bridge to get us through Corona, I think this is the new Saint Ali. It's going to be sort of a platform of curated provisions from local and international artisans whom we like, trust, and have a friendship with.
It's so interesting. And it's so interesting to say that you feel like you're a tech company, not a coffee business, because it's a similar, I guess, with Shane Delia and Providor. I mean, he's obviously still a hospitality business as well, but I think with Providor, it's tech first, isn't it? And yeah, it's a digital world.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, we're on Providor as one of the suppliers, and Shane's a good friend. I've been watching what he's doing. I'm super impressed. I think the guy's a legend, and everything he's done is amazing. Um, and I know that he's outsourced the logistics to it. We haven't done that. We've kept that in house, and we might have to at some point. But we've got, today we had 15 drivers on the road, and that's also, there's a tech component to that. I mean, you need transport management software and wholesale management software, and luckily for us, we're living in a world where you can have cheap plugins to sort of life hack it, but because otherwise that software is tens of millions of dollars. If you got a DHL platform, you're probably using Paragon, and it's like $100 million software setup or something. Whereas we're sort of plugging in various apps and life hacking it. But what we've also learned though is that the logistics component, which I say we're a tech company and a logistics company because In fact, the logistics part has become even more important because as Australia Post and other third-party couriers got completely, you know, you know, rammed with volume, and Corona hit some of their processing centres, they became difficult. Not, and not, there's no blame here, but I mean, people would order a bag of coffee and it would be 2.5 weeks, circling the country, going in full circle before getting to them. So I said to my team, we've just got to do this ourselves, and we've got to make we've got to make a pledge, and the pledge is we promise you same day, next day, or money back guarantee at the end of the third day. And they all said, you're crazy. I'm like, well, that's what we've got to do, because we're not going to be able to use third-party carriers because they're not coping with their own volumes. That's what we did, and as I made that announcement, we got busier again. So I'm sitting here now, honestly exhausted, thinking I need a couple key recruits, one to run logistics because it's actually quite complicated, and one to up the ante on our tech knowledge, because I don't know, Danny, whether you're familiar with it, but there are so many platforms to. It's very omni-channel these days, talking to people. We'll have a chatbot conversation, a DM conversation, a TikTok, a Twitter, a Facebook, Instagram. I mean, I can't barely keep up, and sometimes I find the same people are talking on all channels. And so for an odd dog like me to learn that stuff has been quite a challenge, but good fun.
Wow. I mean, yeah, there's so many things I want to ask you, but I think one of them is what do you enjoy about doing business? Do you like these problems and solving them in innovative ways? Like, is that what if that is that what gets you excited, or is it about looking after customers, or yeah, what is it that that makes you want to do all this stuff?
Yeah, that's I mean, I'm default creative director of our business. I mean, we've got a creative team and we have a creative director, but I'm heavily involved in the stuff that I love the most is, and that's one of my other sort of, throwaway lines that I use all the time with my team. Creativity is the answer to everything, right? And I think we've always got to force ourselves to think and to challenge. And I always say we're only as good as last week as well. So there's always someone um, wanting to eat your pie. And I don't know if you've read that book, or Take Your Cheese, or whatever, if you know the analogy I'm making. So the bit that I enjoy the most is being presented with a problem and resolving the riddle, right? I mean, if I can resolve the riddle, and I've got over 2.5 decades of retail intuition and psychology. So I think that's the bit I enjoy most. But obviously in that is like, and I think this is one of the great things that even Shane's done with Providor. In that is customer service. It seems to be often a forgotten trait in a lot of these platforms. So like, people expect courier companies to kick their box to the front door and be late. Well, it's just not when you've been brought up in hospitality. As a I was waitering at 15, and you just apply some of that old hospitality service to other platforms, and you volunteer to. You'll ring the customer before you get to their front door to tell them that their box is on its way and where would they like it and all that kind of thing. That's like augmenting, because it's such low hanging fruit in courier service, because we're also used to being screamed at by the driver who's under pressure to do the next drop, and so he rings the doorbell, gives you 1 second to run down 3 flights of stairs, before, that kind of thing. And so for me, if we just provide good hospo service to other platforms, which is why I'm on the actual chatbot myself, and some of the questions I get, for example, I've learned a lot about our customers. Like, I had a question yesterday. Someone said to me, "How much praline and nougat is in the coffee?" And I said, I was sort of like, "What?" I was like, "What?" I was like, I didn't really understand the question. I'm like, "I'm not sure what you mean." And the person, sent the link to me from our website, and they were flavor notes. And I was like, "Oh no, they're flavor notes." And she's like, "What are flavor notes?" And I'm like, "Oh, flavor notes are descriptors by our, coffee roasters and what the coffee will taste like. There is no plain no." She goes, "Oh, great, I'm allergic." Right? So, so we make assumptions that people know what flavor notes are. We also make assumptions that we send out our bags of coffee with a roast date stamp on them. Now, as a specialty coffee provider, I assume everyone knows it's a roast date, right? But you have people on chatbot saying, "I received my coffee today, and it passed its use by date." And I'm like, what do you mean? And it's like, well, today's the 6th of September, and it says the 3rd of September. I'm like, oh no, that's the roast date. What do you mean the roast date? I'm like, oh, that's the date that it was roasted on. That's what we celebrate as a specialty coffee, and so on. And so, I feel kind of ironically, I've been given a gift by Corona to get to understand my customer base again, because I made assumptions about them 15 years ago, but 15 years ago I was in the coalface. And 15 years later, people are asking me how much nougat or praline is in the coffee, and I'm like, what? I have no idea what it is. So from that perspective, enjoying leading from the ground up, like even doing deliveries today. I did deliveries for Father's Day just to give a hand for 3 hours, and watching people's faces, when I'm doing deliveries, I guess it's almost the same reaction. Well, it's the same reaction I had when I had Mini Mishima delivered by Mini Mishima, and he was at my front door, and I was like, "What? What is this? Is So it's quite cool, right? So loving it."
It's so interesting because I think a lot of times people equate tech with distancing and that it's not a real connection, but you are able to make real connections through different technology platforms, and of course through that experience of taking food to somebody at home. It can be quite intimate and personal, and yeah, the data, regardless of whether just the actual number crunchy sort of data that can also teach you so much about your customers, what they like, what they like to put together, which are things that I'm sure you'll be able to take back into brick and mortar businesses in lots of different ways.
100%. And what's interesting is a lot of the guys in the sort of Facebook ad or Google ad or whatever space tend to be pretty young, because they're early natives, native adopters to the technology. But even when you build a Facebook ad, and you make assumptions about what it is that people who bought a Hoover might want to drink, or whatever the case might be. Um, Having sort of been a restaurateur, retailer, front-facing customer service person my entire life, I also have a couple of decades or more of assumptions about what people might want when they order an X and Y, and I certainly understand my age group really well. And so I think being able to overlay tech with that understanding is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty exponential. So you say creativity is the answer to every problem. So let's apply some creativity to the situation that Melbourne finds itself in, or Victoria finds itself in now. And as we know, stage 4, in only a very slightly changed form, is extended. And yeah, we need to get cases down so that we can open. So thinking about many of the businesses around us in Melbourne and Victoria, can you apply your creative mind to the extension of lockdown and give people some ideas to get through?
Of course. So, I mean, I've said this before in another interview, but I think it's even more pertinent now. And so I went through the different phases. I don't remember all of them, but you've got denial, anger, and finally acceptance, whatever those phases are called. I'm probably talking about Danny, because you're a smart cookie, but I go through those phases really quickly. So, you know, I think, day one, week one of understanding what was ahead of us, I went from, you know, this can't be true to this is completely and utterly fucked to, okay, well, this is what it is. Let's get on with it. And I rallied the troops, and I said, you've, and it was literally to 300 staff, and I said, you've got to, we've got to accept today that it's never going to be the same again. I mean, even if and when we get through this, it won't be the same. Things would have changed, and so stop whinging, get on with it, and let's just think our way out of this, right? And so I think with a lot of people, and I think hospitality may be guilty of this. I don't know. I don't want to make assumptions about different segments, but there's been, an assumption that, oh, it's okay, it's only going to be 6 weeks, or it's okay, it's only going to be 3 months, or it's okay, and then everything will go back to normal, whatever normal was. And even I was talking to I had a Zoom dinner party last night with two friends of mine who were both, one's a QC and one's a partner in a law firm, and so smart cookies, and she was saying to me how she thought, oh, in 3 months' time everything will be back to normal, and that's not true, you know. And so the guys who accepted it really early and pivoted really early are now benefiting the fruits of those pivots, right? So for anyone else who's thinking, oh, this is only temporary, it's not. It's forever, and it's forever in some way or another. Because even if we had a magic vaccine today, there's going to be emotional scarring from corona and habit changing that's happened. That's never going to go back to where it was. And I don't want to be the sort of, I don't want to say it's too loud because I hope it doesn't happen. But there also might be another mutation. So I guess what I'm saying is accept that it's happened, and now face your demons and start fighting them one by one. So therefore, the Providore platform is an excellent example. Shane's platform's kept a lot of restaurants that otherwise would be hitting the wall alive. A lot of the good bars that we've got, like the Everly and the Pearl, are making their own cocktails and shipping them out. I've got a little thing I'm doing with Tony Nicolini from he was the founder of Doc and now owns Italian Artisans, and they got hit pretty hard, and we're buying a chunk of pizza from every week on our platform, and so on and so on and so on. So I would have never, if you said to me a year ago, hey, do you see yourself selling sanitizer? I'd be like, what? And Danny, before Corona, I didn't know what hand sanitizer really was. Like, we never used it at home. I'd never seen it really. Had I thought about it, I would have said, oh, yeah, of course I've used it when I visited my mother in the cancer ward. It's that thing on the door, right? That hospital. But it wasn't part of my life or my rhetoric or my vocab. And now I can tell you everything about hand sanitizer. So it's a bit like, in terms of business advice, because for some of these people, um, the government's going to stop printing money at some point. It seems like it's given us a further grace until the end of March. But one of the first things I did was, save cash on a professional and personal level as well. Like, I just stopped spending. I thought, well, I don't know how long this is going to go for, so let's just make sure we've got plenty of reserves and headroom to navigate the storm. So a lot of people who don't make the acceptance really quickly are sort of stuck in a situation of it getting further and further away from them. So I don't know if you want to use a metaphor. It's a bit like getting fit. You can dream about getting fit, or you can just start by one push-up at a time, and eventually you do 100 push-ups, right? Which Danny, I don't know if you follow me on social, but one of the things I've done through this period is got super fit and as a discipline, because I found myself, if I wasn't doing that, I was going to drink a bottle of wine for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and I needed to short circuit that
You're
pretty
right.
bloody quickly.
Yeah, well, yeah, I do follow you on social, but I haven't seen that, and I think the algorithm hasn't let me in on your fitness plan, so I'm gonna have to go and start proactively liking some posts so I can get inspired because I think I've said this before on my podcast, but my plan at the start of all this was to be able to do a plank for a minute, and I still can't even do that. I haven't quite had wine for breakfast, but I certainly haven't, been
Danny, I've lost 21 kilo. I've lost 21 kilos.
Really?
I'm
Wow.
da- I'm down to 12% body fat. Yeah, it went crazy. I decided I was going to, take all the spare time that I had not working, which was, which is not very much because we've been working all the time, and we set up a gym at home, and we just smashed it out.
Right, interesting. I think so. Just tracking back for people, so the 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I think a lot of people have gone through all those that maelstrom of emotions and activity and strategy and rethinking. But I feel like people now, I think, as much as they could accept a certain amount of it. Now I think it's that, that the light at the tunnel just keeps getting a little bit further away. And I feel like people are so depleted that it's hard for somebody now to muster up the energy to, I guess, rethink what they do or, find the energy for yet another pivot. Um, And I think also, it goes back to what you said at the start. We love Melbourne so much. We love regional Victoria so much. We do feel like it's special here, and I think people feel like that perhaps we're losing something and it's going to be so hard to get it back again. Like, what do you think the landscape is going to be for Melbourne and regional Victoria in terms of dining as we do enter eventually a COVID normal?
Look, I'm guilty of this. Everyone I know in hospitality who's eating good's guilty of this, and we're all addicted to the drug, right? So, I mean, if I had applied my arts and skill set to a different industry, I may be owning Atlassian or Google. I just happen to apply my arts to hospitality because it's what I love doing, and that's I can't think of a good hospitality operator who isn't passionate about what they do. So um, uh, there'll be at the aftermath of this. Yes, there'll be people who have thrown the towel forever, um, and hopefully for those people, they've found a new mojo and a new trigger that makes them happy. But there'll be a new fresh blood coming through who'll love hospo, or the old guard will come back and reinvent themselves. So I know, for example, Raymond Capaldi, a chef that's reinvented himself, and he makes some pretty bloody delicious pies that we've got on our website even, and they're I just had one for lunch actually, and that's an example of reinvention, right? So I guess getting back to my messaging, it's really, my mother's passed, but I used to say to her, we were talking about old age, and people, her peers would whinge about getting old, and she would always remind them that the alternative is worse. It's death. You know, and so it's a bit like we can, you've just got no choice really. You've just got to suck it up and start thinking. So, I mean, we can go through examples if you like, if you want to talk about specific things, but I think at some point, I mean, at some point you've got to accept that the new world order, at least in Melbourne Metro, is going to involve some piece of technology. If you're, a destination or rural, farm or something, that's potentially different. But you've got to be able to communicate to your audience.
Yeah, well, I think you have given us a bunch of good examples, so which is great. And I think my other question was around, if you're not a business owner but you're an employee, what kind of, I guess, mindset or practical strategies could you think of for people who work in hospitality?
Well, I mean, I'll answer that question by addressing career hospitality people rather than the transients. Like people who are committed to the craft. I think today even more than ever, you need to be genuinely committed to the craft because the golden era of hospo, hasn't hospitality hasn't been shaken just by the corona. I mean, it's been an evolving, sort of. I think once we lost fine dining as a concept, for example, I mean, I remember conversations and articles about the loss of fine dining at the time, but I also remember one of my most joyous restaurant moments was going to the old Mietas, and when Mieta O'Donnell, bless her soul, who died in a car accident, used to own Mietas, and she'd sit at a table with a glass of Burgundy, and overlook her restaurant, and you'd have white glove service at 1 o'clock in the morning and order a steak and frites. I mean, that's just beautiful, right? And I used to,
Yes.
having worked in hospital, I would finish my shift and go and eat there, twice a week, and I loved that, right? And so that was, as soon as we got rid of the tablecloths and made dining more accessible, which obviously has some upside as well as downside, and but we've lost the art, haven't we? Like, I mean, the La Restaurant at the Sofitel or whatever it's called now was where that brat pack of guys, Curtis Stone and Shannon Bennett and even Shane, I think Shane Delia and George Calumbaris and all those guys all sort of came from. They're all gone. I mean, where do you go for one of those experiences now? I mean, Jacques Ramont's shut, and all the sort of fine dines owned by banks or investors or private equity or shit like that. I mean, it's just a different spot and different place. So I love hospitality, but I love that hospitality. I love the Dan Hunters of the world who make their bread from scratch from grains they grow. You know, and that is a commitment, um, that that's like a sort of almost like a yoga practice or something. You if you're on that journey. I mean, the other young guy I've been watching, who I'm very impressed with, is it Josh Nillard, the fish guy?
Yeah, Josh Nyland in Sydney.
Yeah, he seems to
Yeah.
have an uncompromising commitment to all things fishery, and it's that stuff. That's the stuff that makes champions, right? And that's a little conversation I say to my kids all the time as well. When my son, who's quite athletic, and he's actually got the natural ability and all the bits and pieces he needs to kind of succeed at any sport. But what he needs is the mindset, and the mindset of and he was a gymnast, so pre-corona, he was doing 18 hours a week, gymnastics, and he was exhausted all the time and very good. And of course, corona came, and then he didn't have the mojo, and that comes as a mind body, it's a mind spirit thing, not a body thing. So I guess if you're going to go in the hospo and you're going to, and I wouldn't get into hospitality if making a lot of money is your focus. I mean, it can happen. It does happen, but it's not an easy way to make money. It's a hard way to make money. You've got to love it, and the people that love it get the most out of it, and the people that sort of fall into it tend to hate it at some point. And I say that everyone's got a limited number of service days in them, and then when that service day pops, you've got to get out before you tell someone to bugger off.
Yeah, it's so interesting what you're saying. I think as regards fine dining, I reckon over 20 years or so of being a food journalist, I've written about 5 stories about the death of fine dining, with about 4 years in between them. So it's dead, but somehow it's never all the way dead. Like, I guess it just morphs and it changes. And as much as we don't have those restaurants with those incredible training grounds like the restaurant that you spoke about, we still do have places that provide it perhaps in different forms. I'm thinking of Lake House and certainly places like Bray, where they apply that sort of excellence and that obsession, but in a different form. And it makes me even think of you with the chatbot. I mean, that is like extreme hospitality, but via chatbot. So I guess there's different ways of applying this passion, isn't there?
Yeah, sure, of course. And in fact, those two examples you give, both Bray and Lake House, I mean, I mean, so Ella Zerka, well, she's the matriarch. I mean, she's my hero in lots of ways. And she's been committed to the craft for, I don't know, I think she must be 70 now. I mean, if she's listening to this, she'll probably kill me, but she's got to be over 60, surely. I don't know. Anyway, she looks, can't quite tell how old she is, but she's,
I'm not going to venture a guess, but she's a bloody legend. And anyone who hasn't listened to episode 1 of this podcast needs to go back and listen to Ella, because she's amazing.
yeah, she's a bloody legend. And Dan, I've got a great story about him. He's obviously, he was a big deal before Bray, and he had a profile and all that kind of stuff. And he came into, and unfortunately, still is the case sometimes. A lot of chefs take the money when it comes to coffee contracts, because it's just easy, rather than thinking mindfully about their coffee partner. But Dan came to Sonali one day, and I didn't know who he was. I mean, I didn't recognise him rather, and he ordered like, I don't know, a million coffees, and I was like, who's this guy? Why is he drinking so much coffee? And like that kind of thing. And I thought, oh well. And then a week later, he said, would we be his coffee partner? And we're Bray's coffee partner. Actually, we're Lake House's coffee partner too.
Oh, there you go.
There you go. And he's so committed to the craft that I would say, and I've not said this very often publicly, but I think our best barista head to head with his best barista at Bray, you could probably not tell the difference. I mean, it's when you have a coffee at a restaurant, normally it's terrible, and at Bray it's delicious.
Wow.
And he does it justice. But what I mean is, he's so committed to every aspect of his. Yeah, I'm sure he's done soil science study. Like he's that guy, right? Now that still exists, but I'm sort of more talking about those restaurants which, it's more food assembly and all comes from a central kitchen. That is sort of fast food luxury, and And what I mean by that, it's sort of just even if it's as good, and there's some room to disagree there. Food assembly isn't cooking, it's something else, and restaurateuring is something else. Like you can be a good restaurateur and have average food, so you can create a mojo in a restaurant that people want to go to, and the food's okay, right? And so it depends whether restaurants, restaurateur driven or chef driven, is depending what tends to be better. And when those two come together, when front of house or and back of house come together. In fact, I think my best dining experience in my entire life, and this is going to sound cliche, but it's true, was Rene Redzepi's Noma. Do you know? We went to Noma. So I went to Noma with my family. I just want to be really clear on this. At the time, the kids were, they must have been, I don't know, 12, 10 and 8 or something like that, right? So these were kids. They weren't going to smash bottles of Beaujolais or anything, right? And we so like as a per average spend head, I made sure we kept up with ordering some good wine, but we rocked up, and I remember this. So Renee came out, and all the chefs were lined up, and Renee said, "Welcome to Noma." And then as I walked in, and all the chefs and service staff said, "Welcome to Noma," and we sat down, and my kids turned to me and said, "They think you're a king or something." And I was like, "No, I'm not a king, kids. That's just hospitality done well." And then everyone who served our table knew something about me. When I was in Melbourne, I came to Senali, and I had the so and so and so and so and so and so on. And Renee came out, and he would, I think out of the 18 courses, he personally served 5 of them, and then he took us to the fermentation kitchens in the back of house, and he played fizzball, table soccer with my kids. And that's their most memorable dining experience ever. That's hospitality.
Yeah, wow. I got shivers.
Yeah, and that, I mean, I've got photos. In fact, we've got a photo I'm staring at now of Renee coming out talking to my 2 boys who were then, 10 and 8. And they remember that. That's the only restaurant experience I remember in the world. We've been to lots of restaurants, but and that's like a commitment to that's the service I want. So even locally, I mean, something like Francois, Francois' menu hasn't changed in 37 years or something, right? It's just good French bistro food. But the way they do service there, for me, ticks my boxes. I feel like I'm going somewhere where I'm cared for. And so I hope that comes back, by the way. I have no idea what he's doing. But that's a hospitality that I'd like to see. And unfortunately, with a sort of, I don't know if it's chains or groups, or I think groups is probably the word. Once you have groups and you bring private equity into groups, it's just a different thing. And it's not the thing that I like as much, and, it is what it is.
I guess we've got to hope for some courage in doing, people just wanting to create, people that can't help but be hospitality people, and that they will do what Melbourne does, which is to create fantastic small, medium, small, whatever hospitality venues, but that they're personal, and that hopefully they've got that that great balance between front of house and back of house, and they can create the magic, get our city back shining and golden again. That's what I'm hoping.
Oh, I have no doubt. We're a resilient lot. We'll get there.
I reckon we're going to get there, right, Sal? We're going to get there, aren't we?
100%.
Yeah. You heard it, Melbourne. You heard it, Victoria. Salvatore Malatesta said it is so. Sal, I really appreciate you taking the time to have a chat to us at Dirty Linen. It's so great to have your perspective. Creativity is the answer, and Melbourne is going to smash it. We will get there, guys. Thank you so much, Sal, for sharing your time and your wisdom today.
Thanks for having me, Dani, and I look forward to seeing you again for a glass of wine, and stay safe.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about. We spend a week thrashing around each issue, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This is a Deep in the Weeds production.